Scary sleepover story. I've always been good friends with one of my cousins, Cole, who's the same age I am. The two of us were not quite inseparable, but we always did get along very well together, and were often found together, both in school, as we'd always end up in the same class together throughout elementary school, and outside of it. When we were 12 and in the 6th grade, I was hanging out with Cole on a Friday afternoon around the later part of May, and we were psyched at the start of the weekend. We'd wound up at his house, since he didn't live too far from me, and at one point my mom called to say that our grandpa was in the hospital. While the issue with our grandpa wasn't expected to be life-threatening, he was being kept at the hospital overnight for observation, and both my parents and Cole's were planning on staying with him and grandma at the hospital, since my mom and her sister were the two of their sibling who lived close by. I was told that I was given the okay to stay at Cole's house for the night, with Cole's 15-year-old brother Hunter being in charge while our parents were out. This was fine by us. I got along well enough with Hunter, and he was never the bossy older brother/cousin that some of my other friends said they had to put up with. We ordered out for pizza, and enjoyed goofing off as boys that age tend to do. At around 9 or so, there was a knock at the front door, and Cole went to answer it. I was a bit curious as to who it could be at that time of the night, and so I watched from a ways back. At the door were two older guys. They said that they were with the city and that they were investigating reports about the water pressure supposedly being bad in the neighborhood. They asked Cole if his parents were home, and when Cole said they were unavailable. At that moment, which we were told to say to strangers if our parents weren't home, the guys started asking a bunch of questions about how the water pressure was in the house and if they could come inside to check. Hunter came over at that point and politely told the guys that the water pressure was fine and perhaps they should move on to check on other homes in the neighborhood. The guys seemed reluctant to leave but turned and walked away after Hunter started closing the door. After the door was shut, we looked at each other and shrugged, but didn't think too much of it after that and went back to goofing off. Eventually, we decided to go to bed. Cole and Hunter shared a bedroom, and we all agreed that I'd sleep in there with them, rather than me hitting the sack on the couch or something like that, so that we could talk while we fell asleep, and Hunter grabbed a sleeping bag out of their camping supplies for me. When we got into their bedroom, they stripped down to their briefs, and I remembered Cole had mentioned to me once a while back that they had started sleeping in just their underwear. Since I hadn't originally planned on staying the night, I hadn't brought anything with me from home as far as overnight stuff, but since I wasn't in the mood to sleep in my clothes, I stripped down to my briefs as well, though I felt a bit embarrassed, even though we were all guys there and I knew they wouldn't say anything or be judgmental. They climbed into their beds and I quickly crawled into the sleeping bag, and after talking for a while about random stuff we eventually fell asleep. Early the next morning I got up because I had to pee, and so I quietly got out of the sleeping bag and went and did my business in the bathroom. On the way back to the bedroom I heard something in the family room, which was on the opposite end of the house from the bedrooms and particular bathroom I was using. I didn't pay too much attention to it at the time, thinking it must be either Cole or Hunter, until I got back into the bedroom and realized that both of them were still in there. Trying not to panic, I woke them and told them that I thought someone was in the house. They quietly followed me, and the moment we walked into the family room we saw the two guys from the night before in there, and it was rather clear they were robbing the place. One of them started moving towards us as he pulled out a wicked-looking knife. The three of us promptly raced to the front door, somehow managed to get it unlocked and open, and we fled outside. As luck would have it, a cop was driving by at that particular moment. We quickly flagged him down and told him about the two guys in the house. The cop called for backup, and within a couple of minutes several other cops were there, and they proceeded to enter the house, and after some searching they caught the two guys. The cops figured out that the two guys must have entered from a window in the laundry room that had a broken latch, and had probably targeted that house because, while it wasn't empty, they'd probably realized that there were no adults there and figured that if we discovered them, we could be more easily dealt with than adults. To add insult to injury, while we were waiting outside while the cops searched the house both to get the two guys and make sure that there was no one else with them, some of the neighbors came out to see what the commotion was about. And this included some kids who went to the same school as Cole and me, including a few who were in our 6th grade class with us. It was during that time that the three of us realized that we'd never had the chance to get dressed, so, just like in the stereotypical nightmare, we had to stand outside in view of everyone in just our briefs for what seemed like forever before being allowed back inside. Went back to school on Monday, Cole and I had to put up with more than a bit of snickering until school ended. Sleepover gone wrong. When I was in 6th grade, I had this friend, Jamie. At school, I didn't notice too much out of the ordinary about Jamie, but now looking back, I realized that she faced a lot of hardship. She would tell me things like how she had a fungus on her feet from not wearing clean socks, and that she constantly got headaches because of her eyesight. She probably should have had glasses. For some reason, none of this set off any red flags in my 11-year-old brain, and I jumped at the chance to come to her house for a sleepover. Jamie invited me to come over at the beginning of the school week. It was only after I received this invitation that she started to tell me more about her home life. She lived in a duplex with her mom and teenage brother. Her dad lived on the other side of the duplex. Her parents were divorced. I thought it was weird that the dad still lived in the same house as the mom even though they were divorced, but I didn't press the matter. Jamie went on to tell me that her father had recently held a gun to her brother's head during a heated argument. This immediately set off alarm bells in my head. I'd never been around guns before. But again, my 11-year-old brain didn't think to tell my mom about what Jamie had told me. I was just excited to be going to a sleepover. Friday rolled around, and my mom dropped me off at Jamie's house. The neighborhood was pretty run down, but not terrible. I walked in the house and met Jamie's mom. She was super nice and welcoming. Jamie's dad was also there, and I was a little afraid of meeting him, but all of that was forgotten as Jamie and I went outside to play in the woods in her backyard. Sleepover gone wrong. When I was in 6th grade, I had this friend, Jamie. At school, I didn't notice too much out of the ordinary about Jamie, but now looking back, I realized that she faced a lot of hardship. She would tell me things like how she had a fungus on her feet from not wearing clean socks, and that she constantly got headaches because of her eyesight. She probably should have had glasses. For some reason, none of this set off any red flags in my 11-year-old brain, and I jumped at the chance to come to her house for a sleepover. Jamie invited me to come over at the beginning of the school week. It was only after I received this invitation that she started to tell me more about her home life. She lived in a duplex with her mom and teenage brother. Her dad lived on the other side of the duplex. Her parents were divorced. I thought it was weird that the dad still lived in the same house as the mom even though they were divorced, but I didn't press the matter. Jamie went on to tell me that her father had recently held a gun to her brother's head during a heated argument. This immediately set off alarm bells in my head. I'd never been around guns before. But again, my 11-year-old brain didn't think to tell my mom about what Jamie had told me. I was just excited to be going to a sleepover. Friday rolled around, and my mom dropped me off at Jamie's house. The neighborhood was pretty run down, but not terrible. I walked in the house and met Jamie's mom. She was super nice and welcoming. Jamie's dad was also there, and I was a little afraid of meeting him, but all of that was forgotten as Jamie and I went outside to play in the woods in her backyard. I did not go back to sleep, and I was very happy when my mom came to get me. It was only after my mom picked me up that I told her everything, from the toe fungus, to the gun incident, to the coffee incident. She was obviously upset, but not mad at me. She told me very sternly that I would not be spending the night at Jamie's house again, but Jamie could come to our house if she wanted. Jamie moved schools before we started 7th grade. I never saw or heard from her again. The only piece of news I heard about her was a few years later. I was in high school at this point, and my mom found a newspaper article that stated Jamie's mom had set their duplex on fire in order to get insurance money, and that Jamie's mom had been arrested. There was no mention of Jamie or her father, so suffice to say, Jamie, wherever you are, I hope you're okay. And Jamie's dad, and probably her mom too, let's not meet again. Creepy cousin at the sleepover. Back when I was in 6th grade, I had a close-knit group of friends. There were 4 of us and we were all girls and we hung out all the time. Sleepovers were a norm for us and we would usually rotate houses seeing as all our parents knew each other and we all live relatively close to each other, the farthest being 10 minutes away. One particular sleepover, we were at my friend Caitlin's house and 2 of her cousins just happened to also be sleeping over. Caitlin had 2 older sisters and an older brother that were all really nice and friendly. During our sleepovers they usually just stayed in their rooms and only came out for food, so we never really felt like we were imposing on them. Her brother would let us play with his PS2 sometimes, and his sisters would talk to us about boys and high school gossip, which at that time we thought was really cool. Overall, Caitlin had a great relationship with her siblings. I couldn't say the same for her cousins though. One of her cousins was in 8th grade and she was closer in age to one of Caitlin's older sisters who was a freshman in high school, so she was staying in her room. The other one was a boy who was a junior in high school and naturally stayed with Caitlin's brother. The girl was nice even if she seemed a bit shy. The guy, however, just gave me the creeps. He was definitely more outgoing, but something about his mannerisms was strange, and when he smiled it looked like he was smiling at something he thought of in his head and not necessarily at you. He had shoulder-length, stringy and greasy dirty blonde hair, and he was pretty scrawny for a guy his age. He looked like he could also be a freshman in high school. Caitlin really seemed uncomfortable around him. Later on, when we were in Caitlin's room, she told us that she just recently met her cousins because their mom and her mom had a falling out for a few years and weren't talking to each other. They recently reconnected, and so they thought it would be a good idea if Caitlin's aunt and her children came to visit for a weekend. Caitlin said that her female cousin was nice enough, but that she thought the guy was weird. Ever since he got to their house, he's been trying to hang out with her instead of her brother. He would go into her room and go through her toys and books to try to make conversation with her. He was also kinda touchy. He would pet her cheeks and her hair. When she would flinch or move away from him, he would get this really cold look in his eyes and would stare at her for a few seconds before smiling that creepy smile he does. We all agreed that it was really weird, but eventually we moved on to other things and talked about the usual stuff 6th graders talk about. We ended up watching a movie before bed and took our turns to go to the bathroom in the hallway that Caitlin shared with one of her sisters. The oldest had her own bathroom in her room, to brush our teeth. Everyone called dibs on their turn, and since I didn't really care, I was the last one to go there. When my friend Lucia came back and told me she was done, I was relieved because I was getting antsy and tired and just wanted to brush my teeth, lay in bed, and gossip until we all fell asleep. I walked down the hallway and opened the door to the bathroom. I was so distracted that I didn't notice Caitlin's cousin in the bathroom until I turned the lights on. I quickly apologized and closed the door. At that point I wanted to just leave and run back to the room. He was in the freaking bathroom with the lights off. From what I could see before I shut the door, he was just sitting on top of the closed toilet. Before I could leave, he opened the door, smiled at me and told me to go on ahead. I really didn't care about brushing my teeth at that point, but I didn't want to run away and provoke a reaction out of him. I entered the bathroom and immediately locked the door behind me. I quickly brushed my teeth and did my business. This is when things get really creepy for me. I opened the door and he was still there, waiting, with a smile on his face. "Let me walk you back to your room." I didn't even know what to say to that. He took my silence as a yes, I guess, because before I knew it, he grabbed my right hand and was walking with me back to Caitlin's room. His hands were really warm and sweaty, even though he didn't look like he was sweating or even remotely warm. I felt so numb and I could hear my own breathing. I honestly felt like I was gonna pass out. I swear that hallway has never felt so long. When I got to the room, he let go of my hand and said goodnight. Going back to the bedroom he was staying in, which we passed before we got to Caitlin's room. I walked back inside and I guess I was making a face because my friends all came up to me and asked me what was wrong. I told them what happened and they all agreed that it was super weird, and Caitlin said she would talk to her mom in the morning. I hoped that it all ended there, but it didn't. As a rule, we weren't allowed to lock doors during sleepovers. It's usually fine, but not in this instance. I had to have been sleeping for a few hours when Caitlin was shaking me to wake up. Apparently she had been up for a while, and with me being the closest to her, I was the first one she ran to. She then told me, with her voice shaking, that her cousin had opened the door to the room twice, to her knowledge, already, and would stare in the room for almost a full minute before quietly closing the door. I was really frightened when I heard this. He was just watching us sleep throughout the night. I agreed to jump into Caitlin's bed with her and waited. It didn't even take that long when I heard the door open. We both just froze and stared straight at the door. There was no light in the hallway, and the only source of light in that room was from the moon outside, but we could still see a silhouette of someone's head peeking through the door. We could feel his eyes on us and he was just staring into the darkness of Caitlin's room for a few seconds. We were trying not to move so that he didn't know we were awake, but it didn't matter. He let some air out of his nose as if he was trying not to laugh. "Hey Caitlin," he whispered, and then just closed the door. Caitlin looked like she wanted to cry. She grabbed onto me and we just held each other and waited until he decided to come back. He never did end up coming back. I guess it wasn't as fun since he knew we were awake. We never ended up going back to sleep that night though. The next morning my mom came to get me pretty early and I said my goodbyes. I was glad Caitlin's cousin was still asleep. When I saw Caitlin in school I asked her what happened when I left. She said she told her mom and that her mom was really concerned and said that she would talk to their aunt. I guess she told my mom about what happened to me too because she asked me about it later on and was prying to see if anything else happened to me. After that, she made sure that Caitlin's cousins were not around before allowing me to sleep over at their place. She didn't have to worry though because they never came to visit after that. I don't know if Caitlin's mom had another falling out with her sister or if she just never invited them back to her house, but Caitlin's creepy cousin, let's not meet ever again.